B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Tuesday, April 16th, 2019. Democratic leaders are feeling the burn. And they're really confounded. They want to take this guy down, but they're afraid of the Sanders supporters and what will happen if they do. Now, I want to acknowledge there are people who listen to this podcast who have a favorite Democratic candidate for president, and they hope every day that I'm going to talk about their favorite, and I'm going to try. But with now 19, 20 people in this race, can't do it every day. And so I invite you to send me information, send me links to stories about candidates who you favor, and I'll do my best to cover them when I think it's newsworthy. And the rest of the time, I'm going to use my nose for news, and wherever it leads me. So I want to start off with Bernie Sanders. We'll talk about his performance in a town hall on Fox News last night in a moment. But there is an organized effort among centrist establishment Democrats, and you can refer to them as the people who are or support the superdelegates who delivered the nomination to Hillary and thwarted Bernie Sanders in many ways, some that were not legitimate, in the 2016 cycle. So, over the weekend, Bernie Sanders took on the Center for American Progress. And I want to give you a little background because when CAP was just starting back in 2004, 2005, I was aligned with them. I was one of the advisors who helped them build a radio studio, and I used that studio for my syndicated program. When I visited Washington, at that time, I was going out 3 or 4 times a year. And CAP had a lot of great people they recruited to the think tank who were sharp critics of the Iraq War, the Bush administration. And it provided a very useful service. But moving forward, as it really defined itself as pro-Hillary in both 2008 and in 2016, the Center for American Progress, which was headed by John Podesta, founded by Tom Daschle and a bunch of lobbyists' money, became more and more of a typical Beltway think tank, taking money from corporate interest not aligned with their stated purpose. And so, as part of my association with the Center for American Progress, I did a weekly feature every Friday. Faz Shakir, who is the editor of Think Progress, which is not directly a part of the Center for American Progress, it's a separate entity with a separate board. And Faz used to share breaking news about various political issues. And I have the highest regard for this man, who is now the campaign manager for Sanders for President 2020. And Neera Tanden, who took over for John Podesta as the head of CAP, I've interviewed her once and I was not impressed. Oh, she's perky and sociable. But on policy, she is a dead-on corporate centrist Democrat. And she's feisty, too. So, with that background, we saw last week the Center for American Progress, not Think Progress, release information to reporters quietly, on background as it's put, undermining Sanders' Medicare for All proposal with a CAP proposal which would allow people to have a private insurance option. That is a sop to corporate interests, and it's a way to undermine Medicare for All with a kind of competing idea. And so Neera Tanden is responsible for that part of it. Then there was a report that came out of Think Progress, and let's for a moment imagine that Neera Tanden has no direct influence or control over Think Progress. That is their stated position. But Think Progress put out a video making fun of Sanders for being a millionaire. And he has finally released his tax returns. That happened yesterday. It should have happened years ago. But it reveals that because of book deals, Sanders' income was over $1 million for a couple of years recently. And this is supposed to taint him as one of the 1% that he rails against on a regular basis. And frankly, I don't think it undermines his credibility at all. But this is a line of attack that is being pursued, and Think Progress issued that. Now, what's interesting here is that Faz Shakir was once the editor-in-chief of Think Progress. He had battles with Neera Tanden, mostly over coverage of Israel and Palestine. There was also an incident where Faz Shakir, during a visit by Hillary Clinton to the Center for American Progress, was seen as inappropriate because this was in 2008, just before the presidential primaries were getting underway, and Faz Shakir had the balls to ask her about Iraq and her vote to go to war there. And afterward, the reports vary, but it said that Neera Tanden slugged him, and she says that she merely pushed Faz Shakir in anger. So, moving forward, Shakir certainly knows the inner workings and the dirt at the Center for American Progress, and Neera Tanden should think twice about taking him on. So the New York Times and Washington Post have picked this up, hoping to spread a message that Democrats are divided and that there's infighting going on. Now, I support Bernie Sanders here. I don't believe that the Center for American Progress should be sniping at him in the manner that they are. And in this New York Times story, let's see, it was published yesterday. The headline reads, "The Rematch, Bernie Sanders versus a Clinton Loyalist." And what is so bizarre is that on the second page, the story, as I printed it out on 8x10 paper, runs 10 pages. On the second page, because Neera Tanden apparently isn't willing to be too quotable about this, they turn to her mother, Maya Tanden, who says that her daughter can be very aggressive. She's not going to let anyone rule over her. She has loyalty to Hillary because Hillary is the one who made her. I mean, this is gossip reporting. This is Connie Chung, interviewing Newt Gingrich's mom and saying, tell me something. The cameras are rolling, but if you tell it to me, nobody will know it. And so I'm not going to give you any more quotes from Neera Tanden's mom. I think that's ridiculous. And I think that is a new low for the New York Times. But in this article, they also report Mark Zuckerberg increased his donations to the Center for American Progress from a mere $15,000 in 2017 to over $650,000 in 2018. And critically, last year, the CAP got $1 million from the Family Foundation of Jonathan Levine, a pro-Israel managing partner at Bain Capital. And get this, one of the recent controversies was when Neera Tanden invited Benjamin Netanyahu to come to the Center for American Progress, and emails leaked from John Podesta's cell phone indicate that she and Podesta were chatting online back and forth about this, and after Netanyahu was there, she complained to Podesta, "The far left hates me for organizing this visit, but the invitation may have sealed the deal with a new board member." The next month, Tanden wrote a jubilant email to Podesta, telling him that Levine was joining the board. Her email to Podesta read, "So Netanyahu was worth it," adding a smiley face emoji. And as I mentioned, now quoting the Times, last week the center held an off-record briefing and made follow-up contacts with reporters, picking apart details of Sanders' Medicare for All plan. So this is an internal war between the corporate wing of the Democratic Party and the Sanders insurgency. And I'm glad to see that this time Bernie is fighting. In 2016, he took it, and he took it, and he took it some more. Here's another piece, this from the New York Times, published today. It focuses on Leah Daughtry. She is a woman who ran the conventions for the Democrats in 2008 and in 2016. And she said when she talks to closed-door gatherings of wealthy liberal donors, When she mentions Sanders, she's quoted here saying, "I think I freaked them out." Mainstream Democrats increasingly worried that their effort to defeat Trump could be complicated by Sanders in a political scenario all too reminiscent of how Trump seized the Republican nomination in 2016. How, some Democrats are beginning to ask, do they thwart a 70-something candidate from outside the party structure who is immune to intimidation or incentive and wields support from an unwavering base without simply reinforcing "the establishment is out to get me" message? The same grievance that Trump used to great effect. Quoting the article again, "There's a growing realization that Sanders could end up winning this thing, or certainly that he stays in so long that he damages the actual winner." And that is a quote from David Brock, the gunslinger for the Clintons, who ran the dark money super PAC, Correct the Record, in 2016. And he adds that he's had discussions with other operatives about an anti-Sanders campaign and believes it should commence sooner rather than later. So the knives are out, the money is being raised, and you can expect the attacks on Sanders to start very soon. In fact, my next item is Exhibit A. Here's another reference to Brock, who supported Clinton's past presidential bids. "The Bernie question comes up in every fundraising meeting I do. He said the topic is discussed endlessly." And Howard Wolfson, who is also aligned with the Clintons, spent months doing polling and focus groups for Mike Bloomberg before he decided to stay out of the race. And he said people underestimate the possibility of him becoming the nominee at their own peril. So here is Exhibit A in the efforts to smear and diminish Senator Sanders. It comes from Jennifer Rubin at the Washington Post. I've linked to it, so if you care to, you can read this crap for yourselves. So she opens that one of the digs about Sanders in 2016 was that he was all about himself, insufficiently attuned to concerns about unity, quick to lash out at critics, and exceptionally thinned skin. Really? And now he has gone into full attack and destroy mode, targeting in a vitriolic letter the Center for American Progress, a left-leaning think tank that has advanced, for example, a health care plan that expands Medicare but is distinct from his Medicare for All plan. She doesn't see a problem with that. She doesn't see that as a way to undermine Sanders. Later, quoting, "Well, nothing like a high-decibel harangue based on no specific evidence to remind average Democrats that Sanders becomes unhinged at barbs over relatively minor issues. And how in the world would he get through a campaign against the master of insult, Trump?" Now, this is thinly disguised smear material. And she even invokes an anonymous sniper, a Democratic veteran of many campaigns, not associated with CAP. Could this be David Brock? Quote, "This is disgracefully Trumpian, as Sanders desperately tries to create a fake controversy to change the subject on the eve of the release of his tax returns. If he can't take some accurate, fairly light-hearted ribbing from a progressive source, he's proving he'd be incapable of weathering the general election hurricane that Trump would unleash." And Rubin closes with this Trump smear. "We already have a president who can't take the rough and tumble of politics, wants to silence critics. I find it hard to imagine that Democrats want someone who might be just as touchy and intolerant of criticism." That's breathtaking. To compare Sanders, who is too much of a gentleman, to Trump, who has no such problem. I mean, that is just cartoonish. And it shows you where we are. They are really afraid of Bernie Sanders. And last night, he parachuted in behind enemy lines in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. He did a town hall on the Fox News channel. Now, when the Democratic National Committee announced that they won't permit any of the 2020 debates to be carried on Fox, I think that was a mistake. And I think Bernie did pretty well. He had some pretty oppositional anchors there, Brett Baer and Martha McCallum. She's an idiot. And they were trying to trip him up over his status now as a millionaire and the release of his tax returns. And I thought he handled that very well. He said, when are you going to get Trump to show his tax returns? And he said that maybe the Fox News hosts might want to read the books that made him wealthier than he was. So I don't believe this really hurt Sanders. The delay in releasing his tax returns, I believe, is inexcusable and really can't be explained. But he worked this crowd, and he ribbed Fox News a couple of times, saying that not everyone thought that he should come on that channel. But he maintained his dignity. He maintained control of his own agenda. He didn't allow the hosts to, put words in his mouth. I wasn't very comfortable with what he said about immigration, but I thought he was much less tightly wound than many of his television appearances back in 2016. He was a little, more comfortable. He acknowledged good questions, and he did, in many cases, answer them directly. Not always. He's a politician. But I think that it does show that Democrats should not duck Fox News. I think that there are people there who don't watch other channels, and I believe that that is a segment of the population that needs to be addressed. And here's a comment from Greg Sargent in the Washington Post. He says, unadulterated progressive economic arguments made a strong showing in what was expected to be hostile political territory. Meanwhile, it's not clear Trump even thinks he needs to seriously engage the economic argument and may believe he can hate tweet his way to re-election based on immigration alone. Now, there are other candidates running. Yes, I acknowledge that. Cory Booker, who I believe is on a campaign to nowhere, made his official announcement in a kickoff in Military Park in Newark over the weekend, and he offered rhetoric, not any real policy prescriptions from what I picked up. Also on this coast, Eric Swalwell, who is a little-known member of Congress. He's served 3 terms, and he announced that he's running for president on 2 issues, on gun regulation and on student debt. He's 37 years old, and I don't think that he has a prayer. I also think that his resume isn't as distinct as Kamala Harris. They're both former prosecutors from the same Alameda County District Attorney's Office years back. And honestly, I don't see him gaining any significant traction. Then there's Mayor Pete, and I can say Buttigieg. He is the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and he is a very interesting and different candidate. He is a gay male veteran who is quite, in my view, a centrist. He was on Rachel Maddow last night. She tossed him a bunch of softballs, and he's a wonk who just talks about values. He doesn't really get specific about policy prescriptions and where he stands. He'll say generally that as a veteran, he would be very careful about going to war, but he doesn't denounce regime change wars the way other candidates do. What I thought was most interesting about his exchange with Rachel Maddow last night is when she said, look, this is a little awkward, but I was the first gay Rhodes Scholar. And you came along and became a Rhodes Scholar about 10 years later, but you weren't out yet. And she actually pushed him a little bit because he's only been out for 4 years. Now, I don't criticize any person about how they choose to discuss or reveal their sexual orientation. But I thought it was a very interesting conversation, and he didn't get defensive or squirm. I thought he was very forthcoming. So he's a refreshing candidate. He's attracting a lot of support from middle-of-the-road Democrats. Could he beat Trump? At this point, I really don't think so. Now, I want to credit Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts, who is running the most policy-rich campaign. I think she's even outpacing Bernie on this. Bernie has a lot of policies, but, for example, he hasn't talked about prohibiting new leases for fossil fuel drilling offshore and on public lands. And Warren has called for regulation of the tech companies, even breaking them up. Bernie doesn't talk about breaking up the banks anymore. That used to be one of his favorite memes, and I wouldn't mind hearing that again from Bernie. Also, I want to thank John Zwiebel in Hawaii for sending me a Tulsi Gabbard yard sign. It is on display here at the secret studio now. Every day I pause for a minute to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Great people like Wendy Gebauer, Joey Perillo, Paul Tomaselli, and Faith Peoples. They each kick in $5 a month, and you can do it too. It's pretty painless, assuming you've got money in the bank. All you have to do is drop by peterbcollins.com, click on the menu tab, find Become a Subscriber. It takes you to the sign-up page, and your choices are easy. $5, $10, $20 a month. Our $50 annual subscription can earn you a bonus book, like this amazing $55 retail value, the book called 2100. It's a blueprint for survival during and after climate change. So I'd love to send you a copy of that. Dystopian Utopia is the subtitle, and it's a very impressive book. Just take out a new annual subscription for $50 and share a mailing address in the continental U.S., and I'll get it in the post to you forthwith. I was surprised to see James Risen's byline on a story at The Intercept today about Julian Assange. And I kind of braced myself because Risen's been promoting the Russiagate narrative. I think that's why he was hired at The Intercept. But what he gave us is a straight report about Julian Assange. He interviewed Dr. Sandra Crosby, who is an associate professor of medicine at Boston University. She made several visits to Assange at the embassy in London, most recently on February 23rd, when her confidential notes were removed by security personnel of Ecuador. And she said that Assange's right to doctor-patient confidentiality was violated. And Risen goes on to quote her that his confinement is indefinite and uncertain. And I relate to this. I know people on death row who live with the uncertainty. It increases chronic stress and its myriad of chronic physical and serious psychological risks, including suicide. He has suffered a number of serious deleterious effects of sunlight deprivation, including neuropsychological impairment, weakened bones, decreased immune function, and increased risk for cardiovascular disease and cancer. And he also has a very bad toothache, a tooth problem that requires oral surgery. And he says it was because food he was given while he was in prison before damaged or broke that tooth. There's a great piece from Craig Murray, who is a staunch supporter of Assange. It's published at the Consortium News site today. Quoting, "Both Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange are now in jail, both over offenses related to the publication of materials specifying U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan and Iraq, and both charged with nothing else at all. No matter what bullshit political and MSM liars try to feed you, that is the simple truth. Manning and Assange are true heroes of our time and are suffering for it." Then he attacks Judge Michael Snow, the man who held a 15-minute hearing last Thursday and convicted Assange of being a bail jumper. And he says that the enormous prejudice was obvious and that Judge Snow had brought it from outside the courtroom because, other than to say not guilty twice and to ask a one-sentence question about why the charges were changed midway through this sham trial, Judge Snow nevertheless declared that Assange was narcissistic. And Murray writes, it was plainly something he brought with him into the courtroom and had read or heard in the mainstream media or picked up in his club. It was, in short, the very definition of prejudice, and Michael Snow and his summary judgment is a total disgrace. And he says, I am part of the WikiLeaks media and legal team, and the whole team, including Julian, is energized rather than downhearted. All right, glad to hear it. And today I'm releasing my latest in-depth interview podcast. It's kind of a special edition. You'll hear first an interview with John Kiriakou, the CIA whistleblower, who was here in San Francisco this past weekend for a screening of a new film called Yours Truly. And the film talks about the Chinese dissident, artist, activist, filmmaker Ai Weiwei's historic exhibit on the prison island of Alcatraz in the middle of San Francisco Bay a few years back. And here's an excerpt from my conversation with Kiriakou, where he notes that Julian Assange has not been charged under the Espionage Act so far.
He's not being charged under the Espionage Act. And the Obama administration declined to prosecute him for exactly that reason, because they recognized, as bad as Barack Obama was with whistleblowers and national security, even Obama and Eric Holder recognized that it's a slippery slope if you're going to charge somebody who arguably is a journalist and a publisher with espionage. So what are you going to do? You're going to charge the editor of the New York Times and the Washington Post? You're going to charge Jim Risen? Everything he writes is classified. All his sources are insiders.
That's John Kiriakou, and the full podcast is being released to my subscribers today at peterbcollins.com, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, and Stitcher. The second portion of the podcast is a recording of the Q&A that includes Ai Weiwei and John Kiriakou following the screening of this film. And I hope you find it fascinating. I certainly found it rewarding to attend the screening of the movie. Now, earlier, I mentioned Neera Tanden, right? President of the Center for American Progress. She's an active tweeter. And on the 11th of April, she said, there are many cultists on this site. I'm not sure which site she was on. But the Assange cultists are the worst. Assange was the agent of a proto-fascist state, Russia, to undermine democracy. This is fascist behavior. Anyone on the left should abhor what he did, not celebrate it. And Aaron Mate, the writer for The Nation, and he's now affiliated with the Gray Zone Project, he tweeted back, there are many cultists on this site, but DNC Clinton cultists are the worst. Russiagate was the conspiracy theory of failed neoliberal elites to protect their power after losing to Trump and to keep undermining democracy, as they did to Bernie. Very well said, Aaron. Facebook allowed the vicious posts of a man who's now charged with threatening to kill Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Patrick Carlinio of upstate New York posted several entries to his Facebook page alluding to violence against Muslims, and Facebook left it there. Maybe their algorithms weren't properly fed. He frequently used the platform to taunt Muslims, attacking them with racist slurs, saying he wished he could confront a group of Muslim politicians with a bucket of pig blood. And he also shared video clips of alarmist reports about American Muslims on Fox News. Meanwhile, liberals are upset at the rather passive response by Nancy Pelosi and other Democratic leaders to the attacks on Omar. And let's be clear, Trump is playing a potentially deadly game. He continues to target her. I heard Rush Limbaugh frequently lying about Ilhan Omar on his program this morning. He connects her with Hamas. And the failure of the Democratic leaderships to fully support Omar and to fully reject these scurrilous claims against her is a real problem. And Rashida Tlaib of Detroit, who is also she's the other Muslim congresswoman, she noted, without mentioning Pelosi, they put us in photos when they want to show our party is diverse. However, when we ask to be at the table or speak up about issues that impact who we are, what we fight for, and why we ran in the first place, we are ignored. To truly honor our diversity is to never silence us. And there was a group of 200 progressive groups who wrote Pelosi expressing their frustration, and I'm glad to see people speaking up. The fire at Notre Dame is out. I brought in my gargoyle. I have a miniature replica of one of the gargoyles on the roof of Notre Dame, and I brought it into the studio today. I feel sad, like so many people. I'm a recovering Catholic. The religious aspect of it is not so important to me. But this is a historic structure that goes back to, the 13th century. We know that no one was killed. The fire was found under the roof in a network of wooden beams dating from the Middle Ages that is nicknamed the Forest. And the cathedral has people who were going up 3 times a day to check for fire dangers. The almost 300-foot spire, which was a wood frame structure covered in lead, it is gone, and they will have to replace that. There are already pledges of 600 million euros to help fund reconstruction. Also today, a podcast I recorded is being released at Who, What, Why. It is an interview with sociologist David Brotherton. He's the man who's been studying gang violence since the 1990s, and he went to Ecuador in 2017 to look at the 10-year results after Ecuador reformed its police and reformed its laws by decriminalizing gangs. The bottom line, the murder rate dropped by over 400%. You can hear Dr. Brotherton and my interview right now at whowhatwhy.org. And finally today, Columbus, Ohio, is the scene of a crackdown on an activist named John Shade III. Now, he pled not guilty in federal court yesterday to charges relating from an FBI investigation that was linked to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. That was the group that was supposed to use police-state tactics to prevent a terrorist attack from non-citizens, right? So Shade, who uses Twitter, goes to protests, is clearly not a Trump supporter. He says he is a father, an independent journalist, an anti-fascist, a humanist, a soccer coach, and a gardener. But the FBI and the JTTF have him in their crosshairs. They're treating Shade as a terrorist because he has a record of minor offenses related to protesting, white supremacy, human rights abuses by ICE, police brutality, and tax reform. In January, they carried out an arrest and search warrant against Shade, and they ripped up his house, they took the kids' video games, and it's an ugly mess. The story is at opednews.com if you want to get more information. Thanks for joining me today for my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it far and wide. You'll find it on YouTube, and hopefully there won't be dead air at the beginning of the show today like there was yesterday. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.